Red Dead Redemption 2 is widely regarded as a top 5 video game ever conceived by the humankind. Some might even say it is the greatest game of all time. However, a criticism that I haven't seen enough, if any of, is the writing and sidelining of certain characters. And in my opinion, nothing personifies this more than Bill Williamson and Javier Escuela. Now you might be wondering, Red Dead 2 has some of the best character writing in any game ever. Look at Arthur, Dutch, Micah, even Milton has some great writing. Why are you questioning this? Besides the fact that I wanted to make a unique Red Dead Redemption 2 analysis video, Bill and Javier are some of my favorite side characters in gaming. But considering how integral Javier and Bill is to the plot of the first game, you'd expect in the prequel game, with a sequel name, you'd expect them to make you feel very emotionally attached to Bill and Javier, making it understandable why John holds so much disdain and heartbreak whenever he talks about Bill and Javier. But the game doesn't do that. Heck, in the first significant mission in the game, the Chapter 1 mission, Who the Hell's Leviticus Cornwall, Bill fucks up on blowing the tracks, which becomes a running gag in the story, and Javier fails to jump onto the train. That basically spelt doom for their worth as characters if the game wants you to perceive them as that incompetent this early in the game. What does the game do, you might ask? The game instead adds all these other characters to make you feel invested in, which isn't exactly a bad thing. I mean, Sean and Kieran are my personal favorite Red Dead 2 exclusive characters, and both are around for a combined 2 chapters. But the main problem lies with 2 characters that you're allies with throughout the entire game, even into the epilogue: Charles Smith and Sadie Adler. Now these characters aren't poorly written, or at least Charles isn't. But Rockstar decides to add these 2 characters that Arthur and John are BFFs with throughout the entire game, without even an ounce of indifference or conflict. But these 2 legitimately do not exist in Red Dead Redemption 1. So in the context of Red Dead Redemption 1, after Sadie and Charles leave Beach's Hope after the American Venom mission, John doesn't hear from them or see them for 4 whole years between the epilogue of Red Dead 2 and the entirety of Red Dead 1. But which characters are in Red Dead 1? Bill and Javier. So now that I am back to the main topic of this video, let's discuss the writing difference between Bill and Javier and the writing of Charles and Sadie. So let's talk about the men of the hour, Bill and Javier. Let's start with Javier, the lesser of the 2 in Red Dead Redemption 1. In Red Dead Redemption 1, Javier is always referring to John as brother, obviously referencing their time in the Van der Linde gang. And John says how what you and Dutch did was wrong, and the way you left me was wrong. Without the context of Red Dead Redemption 2, you'd imagine that Dutch and Javier, and by association Bill Williamson, must have betrayed John so deeply, and it's clearly hurt him to his rotten outlaw core. But with the context of Red Dead Redemption 2, Javier never exactly did anything to John, besides sorta aim his gun at him in the standoff, and not finding him when he, Dutch, Micah, and Joe go to look for him after he got shot off the train in Chapter 6. But the game never shows Javier directly changing and betraying John in the way Red Dead 1 implies. And looking back at Red Dead 2, Javier and Bill's betrayal feels almost rushed and or undercooked or underdeveloped. There is no mission between Chapter 4 and Chapter 6 that shows Javier go through some sort of ego shift or character shift where he becomes similar to the character he is in the first game. The game just turns him into a one-note lackey for Dutch in Chapter 6. While you could chalk it up to Micah getting in Dutch's ear and then Dutch preaching Micah's lies to the gang, turning Javier from a caring, charismatic and smart-dressed outlaw to a near voiceless, blind-following henchman to Dutch and Micah, who spends more time in Chapter 6 either saying absolutely nothing, or butting in conversations to parrot Dutch's ideals or opinions, which is a very lame and lazy character regression. Bill, on the other hand, is much more complicated in these games. Both games perceive him as an unintelligent or impulsive outlaw. One of the first lines in the second or third mission of the game, The Aftermath of Genesis, Arthur refers to Bill as a fool for not knowing how to hunt, while Arthur himself needs to be taught how to hunt by Charles, which if anything makes Arthur look like a hypocrite. In contrast to how Bill is shown in the first game, he is shown as a demanding leader, and the first major antagonist of Red Dead Redemption 1. A game where you develop a sort of annoyance or hatred towards Bill, for just completely disregarding his past brotherly bond with John. In Red Dead Redemption 2, his entire character start to finish is a hot-headed, dumb-as-rock side character who has about 4 missions to actually showcase who and how he is. The main mission titled Sodom, Back to Gomorrah, he gets frustrated at Arthur for him referring to as nothing more than a fool or an idiot whenever he messes up, but when anyone else, including Arthur, messes up, it's just one of them things, or it just gets brushed to the side. This is almost the perfect setup to start Bill shifting his character into the way he is in Red Dead 1. Whether it's him starting to come up with flawless schemes, or showcasing him in battle, or showing his leadership qualities, by him being included in planning more than just one shoddy heist in a livestock town that still somehow resulted in about 20 plus dead lawmen, even if you do it as silently as possible. Bill never really does anything more than that. He barely does anything in any of the key shootouts in the game, he doesn't plan anything else, and come chapter 6, he's basically gone down the Javier route of becoming a near voiceless, mindless henchman who parrots Dutch's ideals and turns into a completely different character overnight with no real reason. Again, it could be the same as I brought up with Javier, that Dutch preached Micah's lies and Bill couldn't help but believe it. But while Dutch is a very, very charismatic individual, Bill shouldn't be that empty-headed and weak-minded to believe that Arthur or John, 2 men who Bill has known personally for about 6 years come 1899, is suddenly the villain because they allegedly snitched to the Pinkertons about the bank heist. Even though Bill has first-hand witness of what Dutch did in Blackwater, there should have been a bit of doubt in his mind on his morals or his levels of honesty. Again, like I brought up, if the game had showed all the name-calling and belittling that Arthur and John shove in Bill's face, starting to get to him, and then using the collapse of the Van der Linde gang as a means to get back at them, that would have been very compelling, especially because the player would have felt at fault for causing him to become this bitter, angry, sensitive gang leader, rather than him just be the Van der Linde laughingstock, then suddenly turning heel without any noticeable change. In the context of the first Red Dead game, you'd imagine that Javier and Bill were massive parts of John's life. Considering how reluctant John is to kill Javier and how frustrated he is with Bill. But the second game never really gives John any reason to care about his relationship with them outside of the possibility of John maybe noticing Javier not entirely pointing his gun at him and Arthur. This for sure would have cut deeper if we had more missions to do with either just Bill, just Javier, or both. And while the game does shoehorn Bill into a lot of missions in Chapter 3, I feel like you could have swapped him out with literally any other semi-competent member of the gang, and it would have been the same amount of significance. And past Chapter 2, there's only about 5 missions that actually include Javier, outside massive gang moments like the Braithwaite Massacre or the St. Denis bank heist. Even on Guarma, where there is significantly less characters to balance than the mainland, Guarma is mostly exclusively a Dutch and Arthur focused section of the story. You could have removed Bill and Javier and even Micah, and next to none of Dutch's actions would have changed. He still would have killed that woman, been shallow and empty, promising towards Arthur, still would have been paranoid of a rat, and Micah would have most likely been in cahoots with the Pinkertons regardless of him going back to the island or not. On the contrary, 2 characters that, if anything, took the spotlight away from Javier and Bill is Charles and Sadie. 2 characters that only exist in this game and are written pretty well, all things considered. Charles goes from not exactly fitting into the gang and then becoming one of Arthur and John's most trusted allies, and Sadie goes from a heartbroken housewife to guns-blazing badassery. The need to develop these 2 characters as integral story characters was certainly a decision of all time. Taking into account how there's about 13 other gang members introduced in Red Dead Redemption 2, including Charles and Sadie, the game doesn't fully expand on most of these characters. Outside of Hosea, Lenny, and maybe Sean, you're not fully given a reason to care about most of the other gang members, like Molly, Tilly, Trelawney, and even Miss Grimshaw to a degree. The game could have easily given Charles and Sadie the same level of writing as Hosea and Lenny, where they're present enough, but not fully taking the screen time away from other characters who need more background. Case in point, the topic of this very video. My main problem with Charles and Sadie getting all the screen time, and all this prominent roles in the story from chapter 3 onwards, is how, in the timeline, Charles had only been with the gang for about 6 months, and Sadie was in the gang for exclusively 1899. So while it makes sense that they don't fall for Dutch's ideals as easily in comparison to Bill and Javier, as they've only been with the gang for about a cup of coffee, the fact that they get way more character development and Rockstar make you care more about these two brand new Red Dead characters over 2 of the 4 primary antagonists of the first game that people had about 8 years to connect with. Now, if you remember, I brought up with Bill that he should have gotten more chances to shine in the shootouts or making plans to make him believable as a future gang leader that he ends up becoming. The game opts to give that role to the iconic Mary Sue of this game, Sadie Adler. Now, I know I'm beating a dead horse with this, but the criticism that Sadie has garnered from these last few years is deserved. She goes from being quiet and heartbroken in the first 2 chapters, outright avoiding everyone, not even contributing to the gang in the slightest, to nearly killing the camp cook over cutting vegetables, to suddenly being a 20 times better gunslinger than a Mexican revolutionary and an ex-military soldier, because she and her husband, quote, split the work. That isn't exactly enough of a reason for her to suddenly be a better fighter than 2 men who's basically been fighting for most of their lives. And there's even points where she's a better fighter than John and Arthur. Arthur barely survived being beaten to death by an unarmed man. Granted, he was twice his size, outside a bar, while Sadie comfortably solos 3 armed men that have her pinned against a little shack in Shady Belle, who are also twice her size, and men at that. Sadie was in the widely hated Siska Penitentiary mission, where you break John out of the aforementioned penitentiary. Sadie is also present for the death of Colm O'Driscoll. She is also the one who, more often than not, is the root cause of some problems, like getting Arturo killed, the shootout at the St. Denis Gallows. She's also described as the one who saved the gang from Shady Belle by packing everyone's things and taking them to Lakay, using the tell don't show writing skill to artificially develop her, quote, character. And then including the epilogue, in a way, Sadie is to blame for John's death. Her hunting down Micah and constantly bringing him up, and then constantly bringing Arthur up and talking about how, quote, Micah ruined our lives, John, we gotta find him and make him pay. Which then fuels John's emotions, and she basically convinces him to ruin all the progress he made in trying to move on from his past and shape his future with his wife and son, who just came back to him at this point of the story. Sadie pretty much used John's anger and emotions to get him to go kill Micah, which then led the Pinkertons to him. Now, this isn't a theory that Sadie became a Pinkerton informant, but in a way she might as well have. She shows up, gets him to do bounty hunter work, gets him riled up constantly with Micah and his past, convinces him to go kill Micah, which then leads the Pinkertons to him, and then she pisses off after that and she's never heard from again through the next 4 years between the 2 games. Charles, meanwhile, is much less controversial, as people agree that he's a good written character. The game shows him as a strong-hearted warrior who genuinely cares for the family he has around him. While he might not be as accustomed to Dutch's preachings as the others, he at least found some solace that he had a place to be. But come the later half of the game, after being in about 7 missions with Arthur, Charles is suddenly him and John's best friend, who will always ride alongside them, despite him only being in the gang for 6 months. The game also shoehorns a Native American storyline that is about 80% optional to the plot, which was supposed to end with giving Charles some sort of actual plot significance. But if you ignore all the optional missions, Charles pretty much does nothing after the camp relocation at the end of Chapter 2, then is suddenly one of the main characters of the endgame, which doesn't seem fair on Bill and Javier. The level of writing of Bill and Javier, in contrast to Sadie and Charles, should have, in my opinion, been swapped. Have Bill get the writing level of Sadie, making him this badass, but having him slip up to impulsiveness and be more proactive, and have Javier be this integral, close-bonded character to Arthur and John, setting up for why he and Bill were so important in John's life, and why he holds him on some nostalgic, emotional pedestal at some parts in Red Dead Redemption 1. But instead the game pushes him to the wayside and gives two other characters who are nearly completely insignificant to the first game, outside of Sadie being the catalyst for American Venom, all this attention, which some fans online has chalked up to Rockstar pushing the agenda of, quote, strong female character, and, quote, strong character representing a minority. All in all, while Red Dead Redemption 2 deserves its gaming Mount Rushmore placement, I will stand by the fact that some of its lazy or unthoughtful character writing is massively overshadowed by everything else. Thank you all for watching. Please subscribe and all that jazz. Leave a comment, whether you agree or not, and if you don't, please give me your thoughts. I'd love to hear them. Have a good day, everyone.
So refreshing. My little soda pop.